Gute Woche and welcome to Chadoshim Gam Yeshonim. Start off right away with we have a lot of interesting shilas this week. Start off with someone asked me about the minhag about saying Moda Ani, the position of holding the hands by Moda Ani. So this is something which is in the Sichos of the Frierdiker Rebbe. It's a Sicha from Tovshin Tes. It was published by the Rebbe in the Mamorim from Tovshin Yud. So after the Rebbe became Rebbe, he published historic Mamorim, previous Mamorim, Contrasim, for the first few years of the Rebbe's Nasias. He was publishing some Mamorim of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and there would be bits added to it. So some Sichos. So this is a Sicha of Tovshin Tes, which, as I said, published in Tovshin Yud, Yud Aleph, whatever. So it's in Sefer Tovshin Yud, and now it's also in Sefer Sichos Tovshin Tes. All right, so let's read on this on the right of our screen. It's a little bit of a whole long story, and he says the following: When mir mechanech given, sagen meine Ani, when I was taught to say Moda Ani, hat mir geheißen zu legen ein Hand zu der zweite. I was told to place one hand next to the other, and einbeugen the Kopf and incline the head. And I say sagen Moda Ani, so to have your hands together somehow, we'll discuss in a moment, and incline the head. Now this is a Sicha which is said Berabim, but most of Anash weren't there, and it was very confusing for people. What exactly does it mean, legging a hand to a hand? Which is interesting because in the Sicha, the whole story, they call over Ben Sion the Meshoris, and they ask him, how do you say Moda Ani? And he says the same thing. It wasn't a Rebbish thing. It was the standard thing, at least in that part of the world. This is the position, the posture for saying Moda Ani. So there was a discussion, and this girl who asked me the question this week, so she uses emojis, and she puts is it like this emoji or like that emoji? So you got an emoji, which is with two hands like this. There's one emoji, and there's another emoji, which is like this, two clasped hands. And the Yiddish words, zu legen a hand zu a hand, is a bit ambiguous. And so there has been a discussion amongst Anash over the years, what exactly does it mean to leg a hand to a hand? And the concern was that this putting the hands like this would be like a Christian type of posture. And so that was the anxiety. And call upon him. Having said that, the late Rabbi Yosef Goldstein, who you see in the picture, otherwise known as Uncle Yossi, so he was there at the Shavuos Farbrengen, in the Frierdiker Rebbe's, in the apartment, wherever it was exactly, I'm not sure. But he was there, and perhaps 10 years ago, he demonstrated exactly what he saw. Now he holds the two hands together, and that's the position, the head slightly stooped. That's the position of saying Moda Ani. And now it's not very common, not very often, that you'll see how often do you see an Elter Chassid saying Moda Ani? But I had once my Zayda Olav Shalom. He was staying in New York by my brother, and it was he was sleeping on the couch or something. And he got up, and I saw him saying Moda Ani. It was a similar posture. So I called upon him. This you have an Adis, someone who was there and saw how the Frierdiker Rebbe showed. He would put his hands together. Now, in the conversation, Reb Leibel Groner was asked about this, and so at the bottom of the page you have from Reb Leibel what he answered. The concern about resembling the Christian behavior, which they do when they say a prayer before going to sleep, was asked to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe answered the Rabbeim also knew about this, and they still had this minhag. Number two, the Christians, when they do this, they before going to sleep, they kneel. They say, get down on their knees. Whereas we're not talking about kneeling. So it's a similar posture, that's true, but it's not kneeling, therefore it doesn't resemble what the Christians are doing. Upon him, just to clarify, we have Baruch Hashem and Mesorah from someone who was there. He's now in Elam Emes, but he managed to show us exactly what he saw. Yeah, it's true that they go and do that also. They do it at other positions, and certainly the emoji is perhaps reflecting a mode of prayer. It's also, by the way, the Japanese do that, as in saying, I appreciate what you're doing. For them, it's the same posture, means something else. Go upon him. This is our Mesorah, and so fine. Let's move on. Okay. Now, someone asked me what's the significance about various points in davening that the Chazan kind of prompts, as we have V'yomru chulam, and everyone says Micha Meicha. So what you have at the bottom is from a Siddur Torah Oir, and about 4 years ago, Kahos published a new edition of the Siddur Torah Oir. This is very interesting, that they found a copy of the Rebbe's own Siddur, where he had made stars at various points and a couple of little notes, very short notes, and it looks like the Rebbe had made notes of what the Frierdiker Rebbe was doing as when he down at the Yomid, which is interesting because this is from Tovshin Beis. In the earlier years, the Rebbe, in the later years, the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't daven at the Yomid. He wasn't in the position to. And say Shmuel Levitin would daven when the Rebbe had Yortzeit. Shmuel Levitin would daven, but it looks like in the early years, even in America, there was a time that Rebbe did daven, the Frierdiker Rebbe. But upon the Rebbe makes notes, and so you have here, if you can look on the screen, by V'omru chulam, there's a circle over here. This is by Shachris, and here you have by Ma'ariv, you have here this asterisk. They're both indicating the parts which the Chazan says out loud. So this seems to be a standard minhag Yisrael, and also you see the graphics of the Sidurim, where they have Omru Chulam is the end of a paragraph, and Micha Moicha, that's at least by Ma'ariv, starts a new paragraph, and something similar by Shachris. So let's go into Poskim. This is a sefer called Moker Chaim. This is written by Reb Chaim Yoer Bachrach, otherwise known by his sefer the Chavas Yoer. He was a contemporary of the Mogen Avraham, and he wrote a work similar to the Mogen Avraham, whereas the Mogen Avraham was fortunate that he became the standard commentary in the Shulchan Aruchs. The Moker Chaim remained in manuscript until about 20-something years ago. It was published by Moker, but it's a Kolponin, this is over there. He says, B'Shabbos v'Yom Tov, the Chazan is Ma'arich v'Yotzer Oir, and the Yochid should also keep on track with the Chazan. It's not correct to be mafsik between B'Yiro and Kodesh, B'Yiro Kodesh. So he says you should try to keep, if the Chazan's Chazan, so you should try to keep you should finish off the word B'Yiro together with the Chazan, which I didn't realize it before even. You shouldn't say Kodesh on your own. What we're doing here by davening, we are simulating, we're describing what's happening in Mesivta Dirikia, etc., where the Malochim are saying Kodesh, and we are saying, altogether, we're saying Kodesh like the Malochim. I'm just taking up the Siddur for a moment. You know, there's a difference between our Nusach and others. Others have the Nusach Kedusha Kulam Einen Ke'echad. We have one Ima Kedusha Kulam Ke'echad. It doesn't matter. It already goes back to Rishonim. There's a difference whether it's an Ima Kedusha or Kedusha Kulam Ke'echad. It doesn't matter. But there is the idea that we are simulating what the Malachim are saying. We are copying the Malachim, and therefore we're saying it all together. So it's an emphasis that the Chazan leads everyone till V'Omrim B'Yiro, and then everyone says together Kodesh, Kodesh, like the Malachim said together. V'chein b'chol aniyas hapsukim u'v'makhelos. And the Kedusha the Yotze v'chein michamoicho and yimloich. And the brachas after Krishma. And Kodesh v'volotzion lo yakdim the hadvorim moichichim sheyoyma yachad. So he mentions various other points where also there is this emphasis that everyone says together. Now, before I forget, I want to share with you a fascinating thing which I didn't prepare to say, but here's the following. There's a shaila, why in Chabad is it not emphasized by Volotzion to say the Kedusha aloud? In der Welt, the Chazan says Kedusha aloud, but prompts Korozel Zevi Omar, especially in the Litvische Welt, it's quite emphasized. Korozel Zevi Omar, and everyone says Kaddish. So, and then you've got the Aramaic words. So this traces back to a Zohar. And the Zohar talks about the Malachim and whether we want the Malachim to realize what's going on. And Aramaic kind of, that turns the Malachim off. So we'll go through this carefully. The first time we say Kaddish, we're telling a story. In Birchas Krishma, we are relating what's happening in Shemayim. The Malachim are saying Kaddish. That's the first Kaddish. And then it comes to Shemona Esrei. Then comes Shemona Esrei, and we are not just telling stories. We are mamish copying the Malachim. It's not just we're telling a story about the Malachim. We are saying Kaddish like the Malachim. It comes of Volotzion. And then we're saying, we are saying Kaddish. We're not even mentioning the Malachim. On the contrary, we are, the famous thing, here we are saying that it's Yidno saying Kaddish, the famous thing with the Baal Shem Tov, with the Parush. Yidno saying Kaddish. So the first time we told a story about the Malachim. The second time we're joining them together. Now we're saying Kaddish without the Malachim. And so that's the Zohar says, you don't want the Malachim to be there, to be aware that you're saying Kaddish, you're taking it away from them. And that's the reason for saying the Aramaic there. Somehow to discourage the presence of the Malachim. So that's the basis of the two minhagim, of whether to say Kaddish and Volotzion aloud or not. Certainly, minhag Ashkenaz is to say it, responsively between the Chazan and the Kohol. But okay, let's come back to what we want to address today. We're not addressing Kaddish, Kedusha, so much as Micha Moicha and Hashem Yimlech. And I want to share with you the following. Let's go on to the next page, next slide. Now, in the Gemara Soita, where is it? In Daf Lamed Amud Beis, it says when the Yidden, when they crossed the Red Sea, and then it came to say Shira, they said Oz Yoshir. Says Reb Akiva, so how did they say V'cheitzad Omru Shira? So he says, there's three opinions here. First one says, actually the Mishnah has two opinions, and Gemara the Brisa has got three opinions. First one says the style was Kegodol HaMakres HaHalal, that you have a leader who's saying Halal, and other people are joining in. How do they join in? Only Rosh Prakim, they only say the main kind of, the main chorus, so to speak. Moshe says Ashir El Hashem, they say Ashir El Hashem. Moshe says Kigoy Go, they say Ashir El Hashem. And they went through the whole of Hallel, every posuk. Moshe says, I have a posuk. They said Moshe says a phrase, Ashir El Hashem. Another phrase, Ashir El Hashem. So they didn't say the whole Hallel. They just said Ashir El Hashem because they were Yoitze from what Moshe was saying. That is the opinion of Rebbe Akiva. Rebbe Lezer ben Yosef really says, Kakotana Makres Hallel. No, they even said, like if you'd have a child who's saying the Hallel, then you can't be Yoitze from listening because a child cannot be Moitzi. So then therefore it has to be repeating. The child says Ashir Hashem. You have to say Ashir Hashem. Moshe said Kigoy Go, as if like a child said Kigoy Go. So you can't be Yoitze. You have to repeat what the child says. So they said everything phrase by phrase. And Nechemia is a third opinion. He Imagine you've got a chazan in shul, and he says the first part, and then everyone from memory says the whole thing. So you've got three opinions, whether the Hallel was said that they did not say everything. That's Rabbi Akiva. They didn't say everything, only responsively. They are only responding like a chorus. Rabbi Yishak Lili said, Rabbi Lezer, the son of Yishak Lili says they repeated phrase by phrase. Rabbi Nechemia says they said the whole lot, and they were inspired by Ruach HaKodesh. Okay. Fine. So these are the three opinions. So now let's come back to what we're saying in davening. It looks like, although they by the Shira, according to Rabbi Akiva, they didn't say everything, but there were certain phrases which they did say, and there are two phrases which everyone did say, and that's referring to the two phrases Micha Moicha, which is halfway through approximately, and Hashem Yimloch, which is at the end of the Shira, and that's what we say. L'cha Ovnei Yisrael l'cha onu Shira. They responded, Ashir Lashem, Ashir Lashem. The Omru Chulam, but they all said, Micha Moicha. That everyone said. So, whereas everything else, it was just Onu, but this was V'Omru. And similarly, Yachad Kulam Hoylu V'Imlichu V'Omru Hashem Yimlech. Everyone said, Hashem Yimlech. So these psukim were said by the Yid, not just heard and Yotzeh from Moshe, they were said. That was by Shachris. Let's now go to Ma'ariv. V'simcha rabba v'yomru chulam, l'cha onu shira, v'simcha rabba v'yomru chulam, micha moicha. And again, and now this is even more interesting. Ze keli onu, v'yomru Hashem yimlech lenu. Elam zogt, onu v'yomru, yeah? It's there's basis for that, but I think the pshat, poshta pshat is, Ze keli onu. When Moshe said, Ze keli v'anveyu onu, they said, Ashir el Hashem. V'yomru, and they said, Hashem Yimlech Le'olam V'od. So you got these psukim, which are amongst the 20-odd psukim in the Shira, but these are the key psukim which everyone said. And that's why, as coming back to what the Mokeh Chaim says, these psukim, the Chazan prompts, and everyone says them as if to replay the event of saying the Shira at Kriyas Yamsuf. Okay, let's move on. Yes, someone points out that unlike Chazoras Hashatz, when it comes to Kedusha, we do say B'yochid, the whole of Kedusha, although there's a lot of Machlokes and Rishonim. Some Rishonim says you don't, but that's what we do L'maisa. You're asking about Malachim don't understand Aramaic. Well, we have it's well known that the Malachim they despise Aramaic. It's a Chayraim of Lashon HaKodesh. It certainly turns them off, apparently. Okay, I can't tell you from experience, though. I was never an angel. Okay, let's move on. The next point which you have on our list is a Ingerman somewhere in England, and he asks a question. We know that you should be davening Shachris after sunrise. It works out that if he's going to be careful about that, and he brings his children to school, as a result, when he will start Shachris, will be very late, and that will very much impact his managing the day. So here's the question of how rigid do we need to be about this? Now, a lot of us don't even have the question, because a lot of us have got a discipline to be at work at a certain time, and we daven before. A lot of us are davening before nets. Most of the minyanim in London are, and probably Manchester too for sure, are davening before nets. But this person is a bit more flexible. He's asking, how strict is it? So let's just go through this carefully. So we first have a quote from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, from Simon Peites, the beginning of Shacharis. Gam tfilas hashachar zman o maschil me'alois hashachar. Shelachatchila mitzvah lahaschil imunei tzachamo. The B'lachatchila Shacharis should be, that means from Estra, should be from sunrise. Dahainu acha yitziasa. Preferably, Shacharis should be after sunrise and not earlier. Because it says Yiru'uchim Shams. And then he talks about slichas, where people will go daven early before Nesachama. Oh, this part of my part of the world is not a problem. It's slichus. Weiter. Aval b'diavad. Im over v'yispal v'shor shalom me'ol omer hashacha yotzo. V'afel chatchila yochel lasis came b'shas hadchak. So we have here that b'shas hadchak, in a moment of where you have a difficulty, you can take the lenient view of, well, the lenient position of davening before nets. On the left of your screen, you have a quote from the Butchocherov, the Eshel Avram. I mentioned him in previous shiurim. He was a Mekurev of the Barditcheva. He, in some places, he refers to the Alter Rebbe Chayov. He refers to him as Neir Yoy. So you can just the profile at when he lived over 200 years ago. So he writes the following, commenting on the Shulchan Aruch, which talks about Shmonesrem im Honetzachamo, Masha Kosvu b'Shem Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov al Vasholem, Kpeido Sheloila Hamtin Ad Honetzachamo. It's quoted in the name of the Baal Shem Tov not to be so fussy about waiting for Shmona Esrei to sunrise. The Kosvu Remez Hashemesh Yotza La'oretz V'loit Bot Soyaro. That it was Loit who was waiting for the sun somehow. And he has a discussion about this. But what's fascinating is that we have some kind of message quoting from the Baal Shem Tov that not to be so rigid about Netzacham, which is very interesting. The Alter Rebbe obviously doesn't bring it. And there's also, I've seen latest for him who grapple with what exactly is the Butchocher saying. What was it that the Baal Shem Tov wasn't so fussy about? I could just add another point that in the Tzemach Tzedek, in Chidusha HaMishnayos, he talks about the Vasikin. We've got the people who've got Vasikin who daven with the nets. And the Tzemach Tzedek in Chidusha HaMishnayos in Brochus, he's not so, he says that it could be that it's not really La Halacha. It might be better a little earlier, etc. Okay, but let's now one more very helpful factor. Now you can probably recognize this last quote is from the Piskei Teshuvos, is from the notes. Okay, so now what's very interesting is we've got this dawn. The word for dawn in Hebrew is alos hashachar, which means shachar means the blackness. Alos hashachar means the lifting of the blackness. The blackness of night has begun to lift. That's alos hashachar. More than an hour later is when the sun actually appears. That's called netzacham. Is there something in between? Sometimes we have a loshen misheheir hayoim in the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, which are our Siddur, and he talks about just before Birchas HaTorah. And I've always struggled with this. What's this loshen kisheyeir hayoim? Is that yeir hayom, that the day becomes light? Is that sunrise? Is that dawn? Possibly something in between. So let's take a look at what he has over here to say. According to some poskim, misheyeir, once the day is light, that's also zman tefillah lechatchila. You don't have to even wait for sunrise. Leheir is already enough. And he quotes now the Butchocher in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. You don't have to wait till Netz. You can daven earlier. He quotes here from Riches Shlomo, from Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. If you have a minyan after Netz, but there are 9 people who are ready to daven before Netz, you can join them to make up their minyan, although you shouldn't have to be clear. No, Netz Yisrael is a different story. What we're seeing is that there is a degree of flexibility that to daven, if it's a little bit light already, you can say it's already Mishiyeir HaYoim. It might even be a din lechatchila. Of course, those who can afford in their schedule to daven after Netz, there's no shaila. But those who are finding it difficult, so you have on what to base that it's not such a big issue. This is quite commonly quoted, that Baal Shem Tov is quoted as being that not to be so emphatic about Netz. Okay, here's a question. I was asked this week, someone who forgot to say Talum Motor. Well, this is not yet relevant to us, it's Ariel Netz Yisrael, but the concept is an interesting question. If you forgot Talum Motor at Mincha, So then, if you forget Tal Motor in davening, and you should have said it, then you realize afterwards you're going to have to daven Shemona Esrei again. What happens if you forgot to repair and repeating right away? So you have to daven again by the next opportunity. You have as if you hadn't davened altogether. You haven't davened on the Shemona Esrei. So what happens if you forgot Tal Motor at Mincha and it's Friday? So then Friday night you're not going to say Tal Motor in any case. A similar question is if you forgot to say Yalav Yove at Mincha on Rosh Chodesh or on Yom Tov, or whatever. Let's say let's keep to Rosh Chodesh. Yeah, you forgot to say Yalav Yove at Mincha, so you have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. You didn't realize until Ma'ariv. You're going to, by Ma'ariv is already Motzi Rosh Chodesh. You're not going to say Yalav Yove in any case. So there's two ways of viewing it. One view is saying, since you missed it, as if you didn't daven Shemona Esrei, you have to daven another Shemona Esrei. The other one says, no, the only reason to repeat is to repair that which you missed. But if you're not going to repair what you missed, so what's the point of repeating? So let's go through that again. It's a Rosh Chodesh. At Mincha, you forgot to say Yalav Yovei, and now you realize at Ma'ariv, do you have to daven Ma'ariv a second time? So the Alter Rebbe brings these two shittas. And the first opinion says, you don't repeat because you're not going to repair. And the second opinion is that you do have to repeat. And so then he says, you should say that repeat, but B'toras Nedova. So if you forgot Yalav Yovei at Mincha, and you only realize at Ma'ariv, so you'll daven a second Shemona Esrei at Ma'ariv, B'toras Nedova. That's all if it's a midweek. What happens if it's Friday night? So then, this is the second quote is from the Ksos HaShulchan. Shabbos, you can't do a Tfilas Nedova. So therefore, if you forgot something at Mincha, which warrants you repeating the Shemona Esrei, but you only realize by Ma'ariv, and Ma'ariv is Shabbos, so then you cannot repair it. You can't do that Tfilas Nedova. So this is what he says. Ein by Ma'ariv, the Talamot, you're not going to say at Ma'ariv in any case. And you don't do a Tfilas Nedova because you don't do a Tfilas Nedova, you don't do a voluntary Tfilah on Shabbos or Yom Tov. Let's move on. Okay. So this came up, this question about wearing a hat protector. So lots of people have these either plastic hats, or they sometimes decide to advertise Sainsbury's and Safeway when it's raining, not to ruin their hats. Are you allowed to do that on Shabbos? So as a young boy, I remember hearing, I think probably from Rabbi Telsner, that this was a contention between the Kloisenberger Rav and his uncle, the Satmar Rav. The Satmar Rav held that you're not allowed to, and the Kloisenberger held you are allowed to. I once asked Reb Zalman Shimon about this, and he summed up the halacha, which is fairly evident in Poskim, that you're allowed to wear a garment to protect yourself. You're not allowed to wear a garment to protect a garment. So this is also relevant for ladies who wear rain hats. To wear a rain hat just to protect a sheitel is not okay. It's not okay because the sheitel is a garment. So you're wearing a garment to wear a garment. That's not okay. If you wear the rain hat it's stretched a bit further, back or front, in a way that it's going to protect your face also, your neck also, then you're protecting yourself, not just protecting the sheitel. Now, those who allow wearing the plastic hat protectors say, one of their arguments is, if it's a heavy rain, so then the rain is going to penetrate, not only not going to ruin the hat, it's going to also come through and ruin onto the person. Okay, so and certainly that's the case with a sheitel. If it's a heavier rain, then it's true. But the simplest solution is let's go with the rain hats, and we'll come back to the plastic cover. With the rain hats, to wear the rain hat in a way that it's a bit extending beyond just the sheitel, in that way it's legitimate. With the plastic hat covers, so generally our mahalach is that you don't wear them, but there are those who do allow it when, and especially if it's a very heavy rain, there is room to be mekel. Nowadays you've got these new inventions, these plastic coats, which include a hood, and that's big enough to cover a shtreimel, and everyone's happy. Okay, let's move on. I was browsing, I saw this teshura, a souvenir from a wedding, which took place in New York, I think, and I saw this very interesting thing, and that is when you learn Mishnayos in memory. The word is perhaps memory is not right. It's the schus of someone who had passed away. Learn Mishnayos to help the neshama. Now, is it important? So in some of the Mishnayos I've seen that they say it's very, very important. You have to save the name of the person for whom you're learning Mishnayos before you start learning. Otherwise, it doesn't get connected to their neshama. So here is a letter which Rabbi Shua Pinson, who was a Gab in 770. So he wrote to the Rebbe, and then we have the Rebbe's answer. It's part of a longer letter, and he says, Rebbe, please tell me about the minhag to b'chol mishfutzis Yisrael. It's a very widespread minhag to learn Mishnayos. Is it necessary? Is it necessary to utter verbally before you start learning that this learning is in memory for the elevation of this and this neshama, of so and so? And then he says also, when you learn about prokim, you learn chapters of Mishnayos with the name of the nifter, like in the yard side, you learn the name of the person. You learn a chapter for each letter of the aleph base of his name. Chapter of Mishnayos. Im bechol kahai gavno amrinu kameshmai galya. Do you use the approach that heaven, it's exposed to heaven, they know what your intention is? Im inyan shel haskoras shem hanifta yesh bazeh mishum zchus. Is there some special merit by dafka mentioning the name? Now, as the Rebbe's style was, he would often underline words, or you'd take the wording of the question and manipulate it in a way to give his answer that way. So of the words which Rabbi Pinson had written, that we can say, Kahai Gavno, Kamishmai Galyo, so the Rebbe adds in two words, Bnei Odom, Opshita. So he says, B'chol Kahai Gavno, Amrino, Kam Bnei Odom. It's if it's visible to other people that you're learning for, or perhaps to yourself, I don't know. Of Shita, it's visible to heaven. Basically, he's saying that that the Eibishter knows that you are learning for so and so, and therefore it is. If other people will see that you're learning for so and so, for sure you yourself that the Eibishter knows. I'm actually a little bit unsure which Bnei Adam is he talking about, himself or other people. So, all right, so the Rebbe seems to dismiss this emphasis of Dafke saying the name for so-and-so. Just perhaps, if I may, suggest the following. You see a person sitting as a regular weekday, and there's Dr. Mishnayos. You ask, what's the bitamol? So you'll say, Mistami is saying Mishnayos for a yard site or something. That's all true. What happens if a person learns Mishnayos every day? So then it's not so evident that he's learning Mishnayos le'ilu nishma so and so. It could be even he himself doesn't remember, doesn't necessarily register that he's learning Mishnayos for so and so. So it could be that if you're learning Mishnayos, you're taking especially Mishnayos to learn for someone, it's not necessary. If you're learning Mishnayos Elah Seder, perhaps there is a bit more room for at least reminding yourself that you're learning Mishnayos in memory of so and so. But this is an Aya Gilui, and I actually, there's a set of Sfarim of the Rebbe's guidance in Inyonei Halacha and Minhag called Shulchan Menachem. So I sent them a copy of this and asked them to include this in the next edition. And the Rebbe is saying it's not such a big deal if you don't mention it. Okay, let's go on to the next thing on our list. Fascinating halacha, which is you'll see it's very, very interesting. Okay, there is a concept of Tchum Shabbos. Tchum Shabbos means that you're not allowed to, on Shabbos, walk more than 2,000 amas, which is about 1 kilometer, out of the built-up area. And that's called the Isur of Tchum Shabbos. So they would, in the Gemara, you have how they would have specialists in measuring land, and they would have markers outside the town. This is the limits of the 2,000 amas from the town, and from all four sides there would be markers on the roads This is the limit of the 2,000 amas. Lots of discussion in Gemara how it can be extended with the little the small houses, odd houses here and there. If there's another house within 70 amas, which is about 35 meters, so then, like in suburban, you may have a bit of space between the houses. That could extend the limits of the city. But we do know this idea that you're not allowed to walk a 2,000 amas outside the built-up area. So actually, in most of where we live, that's not even relevant. But here we have an area in London, or Greater London. This is, you've got here on the screen, you've got Edgware and Boreham Wood. And as you can see, Edgware is to the south, where you've got that red house featuring. And to the north, you have Boreham Wood, where you've got that blue house featuring. In between, as you can see on this Google aerial map, you can see lots of fields, lots of green, and it's more than a kilometer between one and the other. So you wouldn't be allowed to walk on Shabbos from one to the other. And now, then there's a solution. There's a solution which is called Eruv Tchumin. Eruv Tchumin is that before Shabbos, you take a loaf of bread or a box of matzah, put it in a safe container, and you put it outside. You put it up till about up till 2,000 amas from your place, and then you're allowed to, on Shabbos, walk from your place till the loaf of bread, and then you can walk another 2,000 amas from thereafter. The point being that wherever you place the bread, it's as if you're koine shvis, as if you have your dwelling is not at home, but it's where you have your loaf of bread. So that's the concept of the Eruv Tchumin. So now, I had this shaila, it was a practical shaila, and there's someone who lives in Boreham Wood, and he wanted to be able to walk to Edgware to visit relatives on a Shabbos afternoon. So the way we measured was you make you put the Eruv about a kilometer away from the edge of the south of Boreham Wood, that's where you got that yellow thing. And from there, he can go another 2,000 amas, another kilometer, but he cannot go more. Now, this is a very important point. People get confused. Even with the Eruv Tchumin, with or without the Eruv Tchumin, even if you come into another town, you cannot go more than 2,000 amas. So let's say if I had the fortune of getting stuck in Heathrow Airport, and I go out of Heathrow Airport on Shabbos, and I want to come into town, perhaps I can get to Hounslow, but I can't go any further, even if I wanted to. I'm not allowed to go more than a kilometer because Heathrow Airport, I'm using that as an example, may not be accurate, but normally airports are out of town, so there's a green belt around the airport. So then when you get from the airport into town, you're coming from a small town into a big town. You cannot go, you've got a string attached to your back. You cannot go more than 2,000 amas from your beginning, from where you left. So where the question is, where does the 2,000 amas begin? Does it start from your house, or does it start from the edge of town? So let's explain. The general minhag, and this is the way it's the general psak is that you put the Eruv up till 2,000 amas from the edge of town, and then you can still go from there another 2,000 amas in each direction. But here it raises a very interesting question. What did you tell me? You told me that where you put the bread, that is your koine shvisa, you're dwelling there. So if my shvisa is by the loaf of bread, is over here by this loaf of bread, how can I get there from my house? It's more than it's 2 kilometers. It's much too far. So first of all, there's a shita of Rashi, and there's 3 opinions here. There's a shita of Rashi which says the city, the town where you spend the night, that's like Dal Dams. So according to Rashi, the cheshbon is like this. Boram wood becomes Daled Amos. And therefore, from Boram wood, you're allowed another 996 amas till your Erev. And when you want to go back, you go back from your Erev back north. You come to the edge of Boram wood, 996 amas, and the rest of Boram wood you can walk the whole of Boram wood, because the town where you were for the night of Shabbos is like Daled Amos. So here's an interesting, or should we say even a dichotomy. You're saying that the Erev is your Shekinah Shvisa by the Erev, but then you're also giving a privilege that the town where you're spending the night is also like Daled Amos. So you're living in two places. Okay, but that's Shittas Rashi. And that's the Minhag Olam, to say that you can put the Erev up till a kilometer from the edge of town, and from there you have, okay. The Mechaber Shechnoruch, the way the Magen Avraham learns, says like this. He doesn't, this whole idea that the whole town counts like Daled Amos, he doesn't buy. He says you live over here, you come to the edge of town, and you're allowed to walk 2,000 amas. That's okay. You can go further. But when you go back, you cannot go more than 2,000 amas from your Erev. And therefore, you're going to go back to Boram wood. Well, you're going to have to park yourself by the first houses. You can't get back home. That's how the Magen Avraham is. Then there's a third opinion, which says, hang on a second. You're saying that your Koine Shvisa, that your Shabbos is over here by the bread, and you're snuggling in bed or eating your chicken soup over here, and you're more than 2,000 amas out of tether. Now, if a person walked more than 2,000 amas out of his tchum, he's stuck. He's not allowed to go anywhere. He's stuck into Daled Amos. So this is the Ravon, and he says, no, sorry, you cannot go. If you make your Erev more than 2,000 amas from your house, so then your Erev is valid, but you are out of the Erev, and therefore you're stuck. You cannot leave your house. That's the Shitta of the Ravon. So we've got here the Minhag Olam is, as I said, to put the Erev 2,000 within 2,000 amas from the edge of town, but the Ravon is saying no. And according to the Ravon, and this is the Tur asks this question, the whole concept of Erev Tchumin only applies for people living at the edge of town. But if you live in the middle of a big town, the whole Erev Tchumin doesn't really work. That's the opinion of the Ravon, and it looks like the Shittas Rambam, the Rosh, it looks like a number of Rishonim. So in the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe follows the Shitta of the Ramo, who says that you can take the benefit of which Rashi says the whole town where you're spending the night is like Daled Amos. But in the Siddur, this is what shocked me. Someone pointed out to me. Look at those words in the Siddur. He says there, talks about putting Mazoin Shtei Sudas, and someone asked, would a jar of jam be okay instead of a loaf of bread? And the answer is yes, but I'm not going into those details. Yeah, a jar of jam might be safer in one way, but just make sure there's no monkeys or whoever who, or bears who come and eat your jar of jam. But let's come back. He has here this lotion. Shock. Now, if you didn't, weren't familiar with all this whole discussion, this is just an example. But now that you realize there's machlokes rishonim mishatutzach, whether the Erev can be within 2,000 amas from the edge of town or from your house, the Alter Rebbe's wording is clear. He says it has to be within 2,000 amas from your house. He's taking the stricter view. Now here we have the Elya Rabbah. The Elya Rabbah was a little bit before the Alter Rebbe, after the Magen Avraham, who disagrees with Magen Avraham, and he says, here he's quoting the Ravon, in Yeshmi Beisoy, it's more than 2,000 amas, lo yetzi mi Beisoy, because you've lost the Shvisa Sa'ir. You can't get to your Erev because it's more than 2,000 amas from where you are. You're at home in that house, in that blue house in Boram wood, and your Erev is more than 2,000 amas. So you're not allowed to leave your house even. And then the second comment he there said brings up the Rishonim, the Rosh, and the Rambam also hold like this. So this is a fascinating chiddush for me, and I was in touch with various people. Moshe in Kfar Chabad, there's an Erev to be able, if people want to go to the hospital in Srifin, so there's an Erev there, etc. And it's unheard of, such a chumrah that the Erev has to be within 2,000 amas from the house, but that's what we were seeing here. Okay, let's move on. We're running a bit short on time. We have 3 questions left. Number 8 is about the shear of a room for mezuzah. And so it came up with the question, a room which it's got dal, it's got 4 amas square, it's like 2 meters square, but inside that there's a boiler or there's a water tank. So does such a room require a mezuzah? So there's 2 points here. So this is from the Sefer on mezuzah called Piskei She'orim by Schechter and Auerbach, and the 2 people worked on it together, American Sefer. And they write, number 1 in Kuf Samar Zai, the first quote, if you have a room which is exactly 4 by 4 amas, or a very small room, and there's large equipment there, so then it talks about if there's above the equipment, which is 10 tefachim until the ceiling, and some say, so then it says, yes, oimrim, even there is, these large pieces of equipment take away from the shear. Then there's Kabir Moshel. I remember when sometimes you have a kitchen, which is like a very narrow kitchen. So, but it's daled. It's 2 meters wide, but half of that is taken up with counters on either side. Does that diminish? Does it mean it has to be 2 meters square floor space? Or no, the equipment there is, you're using the equipment, is part of the usage of the room. That seems to be that if the equipment is part of the usage of the room, then that wouldn't diminish. I mean, in other words, usage of the room. Here you come in and you are a human and you use the tables, etc. By a boiler, it's a different way. It kind of takes away from the room rather than that you can use the room. That you're not using the room. The boiler takes up. And so if the boiler takes up the majority of the rooms, and then you don't have a room of daled, and you wouldn't need to put up a mezuzah according to this. So he says, without a brocha, that's okay. But then there's another point in earlier on, whether a boiler room is called a dwelling. There are those who say, he says, a room which is just for the boiler, and it's not used for anything else, it doesn't require a mezuzah because you don't dwell there. Unless you use it also for storage for other bits and pieces on a domestic level, then there is room for putting a mezuzah. But if it's just for the boiler, then that in itself is the reason that such a room is not a dwelling, and therefore it's part of the mezuzah. So we've got here two reasons for this. I'm just going to go to the chat, and there's been a few comments over here. Bear with me a minute. Mishnah in Yuma seems with the Azazel 2000 from outside the city. Let me make this clear. There's no question that the din of Tchum Shabbos is 2000 amas from the city. The question here is Eruv Tchumin. Not the din of that not going out 2000 from the city is from the edge of the city. But here you want to have a facility to say, I'm not living at home, I'm living where my loaf of bread is. Okay, so then that's where this machlokas comes in, a poskim, that it has to be, you have to be within 2000 amas of your loaf of bread, otherwise it's too far. Right. Let's move on. Just perhaps before we go further, I want to just throw in about the small rooms. Do small rooms require a mezuzah? Now we know that there's a din of daled of 4 amas square. There are 2 sources in Achronim which say that a small room also requires a mezuzah, and the din of daled is talking like an independent, like a shed, a freestanding room, a freestanding house, which is less than daled, that's exempt from a mezuzah. But when it's part of a house, so you've got Rabbi Kiva Eger and you've got the Chamudei Doniel. Rabbi Kiva Eger says it's true that the room doesn't require a mezuzah, but that door is also a door of the house. Between the door, that little room in the house. So he says that the room for, let's say, a walk-in larder, according to Rabbi Kiva Eger, requires a mezuzah because it's a door to the house. The Chamudei Doniel, which is quoted in the Piskei Tshuva in Hichas Mezuzah, he says a different approach. he says that the din of dal dal dal, it means a house which is so small, less than 4 amas square, is not livable. It's not a normal living. But when you have a bigger house, but it has another, it's part of a living facility. So according to the Chamoneh Daniel, a walk-in larder, a walk-in cupboard, would be chayav b'mezuzah because it's part of a living facility. You live here and you have a cupboard. So there is room to be machmir, to put up a mezuzah on a walk-in closet for these separate reasons, but one wouldn't make a bracha by doing so. Okay, let's move on. So I got this question from a shliach somewhere in Europe, and he's asking, are you allowed to sit on a chair that is covered in linen? So now, he didn't tell me that there's any wool anywhere, but is there a worry about the stuffing perhaps inside? Could be that the padding inside includes linen. Nowadays, a lot of the stuff is made with foam, but it could be take, it has some wool inside the padding. So let's go. This is a specialist sefer on shatnez by Rabbi Yankel Bloy, and he has the following comment: Kisaot hamrupodim b'shatnez, chairs which are padded with shatnez. So they are padded chairs, upholstered. Some say you're allowed to sit on them, and some say you're not. Now, if you're familiar with the Mishnah in Kilai, in the last parak, talks about shatnez, and he talks about covers or mattresses. It looks like that people would, when you'd sink into it, you'd sink into a mattress. So then that would be a problem. Of if it's a shatnez mattress, then you do have a problem. And generally, when I got married, there was the late Mr. Greenhouse. You could buy mattresses with a hechsher that they're shatnez free. So yeah, but what is being said here is about chairs, padded, upholstered chairs. Some say that's not called, that it'll wrap around your body. You'll sit on it, but it's not flexible enough to be able to wrap around your body. And therefore, some says you are allowed to sit on them. There are those who are machmir. We know stories. There's a story, I think Reb Chuna Halperin told the story of the Rebbe. He was told, if someone saw the Rebbe on a train going from Warsaw to Paris, and he didn't want to sit down. Apparently, he didn't want to sit down because of the worries of shatnez. We've heard of various Gedolei Yisrael who didn't want to sit down on the chairs in the train because of the padding, might be shatnez. The Olam is not so particular about this, but all right. So there is a little bit room to be machmir if you know that there's shatnez in the chair. But he didn't ask me about a chair made of shatnez. He just asked about a chair covered in linen. So that's certainly one can be more makel and not to worry about it. Okay. Let's go on with our last question for tonight. That is, so someone asks a question that they have a friend who is struggling financially, and can I want to help them with my Meiser money. If I pay off his debts, is this considered as having given stock? To make it a little bit more, what happened is that person, let's say I'm the lender, they used my credit card. And so I want to settle the credit card bill because it's a very expensive way of borrowing money. So I want to use my Meiser to pay off what they owe to the credit card. So I'm benefiting from this. So is that called giving tzedakah? If I use my Meiser to pay off what they owe me on the credit card, is that called giving tzedakah? Now, here's an interesting question. Al pi din, if I'm learning with the class in the high school, I'm learning Hilchas Halvo in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. If there's a person who borrowed money in good faith, and he had a workable plan, and then it didn't work out, and so now he's stuck with a big debt. So then the halacha is he does not have to take on another job, work a third job to be able to pay this. He owes the money, but he doesn't have from where to pay. So all right, he owes the money, but he's not mechuyev. But then he says if he has any spare valuables, those valuables have to be given to pay off the debt. So here's the scenario. someone's borrowed money and they've got debts. Now, if there's no way they can pay them, they don't have the assets, don't have even valuables, anything, then you can say they owe the money, but who says it? It doesn't mean necessarily it's tzedakah to pay off their debts. It's not an enforceable debt. Realistically speaking, most people do have some valuables. Let's say someone owes money to the grocery. So you're paying the grocery, well, it's not that you're paying them a debt. You're making that they should be able to go next week to the grocery. And whatever it may be, if it's an ongoing, it's not just a kind of a bad debt. So to settle a bad debt may not necessarily be counted as tzedakah. But when it is an ongoing situation, or if they have valuables, and if they don't give the money, well, perhaps they should surrender their valuables to pay the debt, then they are mechuyev to pay that money. And by helping them out, that would be considered tzedakah, by helping them out, that they shouldn't have to sell their kitchen sink to be able to pay what they owe. So let's just read from the Sefer on tzedakah, Mishpat, a specialist Sefer on tzedakah. Yesh oimrim shafilu lo hisna b'shas halvo leoni sheyafresh mimasreiso. Even if when you lent the money, you didn't say that you'll use your meiser to pay the debt. You lent him money, and now he owes you money, and you want you can use your meiser money and to diminish the loan by paying off from your own meiser. You'll tell the poor person, all right, you owe me money. I'm using my meiser, £100 a month, whatever it may be. And in this way, I'm diminishing the debts. But he says you should tell them that you're doing so. Okay. We have now just a couple of minutes left, and I want to give you a bit of feedback from the previous shiurim. So we had last week discussion about an opshare during Chol Hamoed Sukkos, and I quoted sources that do allow it, but then the Rabbi Lerner, who's a Rosh HaKollel in Crown Heights, he himself has a child who turned 3, a boy who turned 3, and he was advised at the time not to do it. The other thing which came up was about if the hot plate was disconnected on Shabbos to be able to have hot cholent in the Beis Chabad, are you allowed to have a goy to reconnect it? So someone pointed out to me there's a sefer called Shilas Tshuvas Hashluchim. There's a man in Eretz Yisrael called Nachmanson who put together questions which he'd received from Shluchim, and he deals with this question, and he has 2 solutions. One is the guy plugs it in, and then later the guy has a piece of kugel, so he's doing it for himself. All right, I don't know how practical that is. All right, that's one possibility. The other possibility, he says, it's Issa D'Rabbanan to ask a guy to do something for you. How about if you ask John to tell Bob? Yeah, it's called Amira la Amira. You tell one guy to tell another guy. So then that reduces it to Shvus Dishvus. Now, there is such an opinion in Poskim, but I spoke with some other people who are knowledgeable in Alter Rebbe's Mahalach. Alter Rebbe doesn't mention this at all, and I believe it's not a valid approach, because the Alter Rebbe takes a view that when the guy does it for you, he's like your shliach, and even if you didn't ask him to do so, you'd actually have to. He's about to plug it back in. You have to tell him not to, because he's doing it for you. If he's doing it for himself, it's a different story. If he's doing it for you, so what's the difference whether you told him directly, you told one guy to tell another guy? The bottom line is that he's doing this effort for you, and which doesn't look like that would be acceptable to do so on Shabbos. All right, so we'll stop with that. And I want to finish off, and that is that next week is my father's yahrzeit, and next Sunday, not tomorrow, next week. And we're having a family get together. So we're going to have the shiur earlier. And I saw, Baruch Hashem, quite a few people logged in early. So it looks like it's and so therefore, Bez Hashem, next week, we'll start the shiur at 8:15. And the days are getting shorter or earlier. So possibly we'll remain with that time for the foreseeable future. So I wish you all good Tavoch and meet in good health. Good
Tov. So thank you.
A good Woche, Rabbi Lou.